The SAXON Maiden saved a wounded pagan boy. At dawn, his father arrived with 50 warriors. The blood had already frozen black against the snow when Aelwyn found him. Steam rose from the boy's wounds like smoke from a funeral pyre, his pale lips moving in whispered prayers to gods her father would call demons. Yet something in his face, innocent even in agony, made her knees buckle beside him in the crimson-stained clearing. Her hands shook as she pressed linen against the deepest gash across his ribs. Saxon steel had carved him like a sacrifice, leaving marks that screamed of brutal interrogation. The boy couldn't be older than 16 winters, his blonde hair matted with dirt and gore. When his eyes fluttered open, storm gray and wild with fever, he gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "Hide me," he gasped in broken Saxon, his accent thick as Danish mead. They killed everyone, please." The smart choice was to let him bleed out in the snow. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Never trust a Dane, daughter. They are wolves in human skin." But those gray eyes held no malice, only the desperate fear of a hunted animal. Christ himself had shown mercy to thieves and sinners. Against every instinct screaming danger, Aelwyn dragged the unconscious boy through the skeletal winter forest toward the ancient Roman ruins. The crumbling stones had stood since before Saxon or Dane had ever set foot on these contested lands. If the old gods still dwelt anywhere, it was here, among the moss-covered arches where her ancestors once worshipped. For 3 endless nights, she became his shield against death itself. Antes de continuarmos con esa historia incrível, preciso te fazer uma alerta importante. Muitos inscritos têm relatado que YouTube removiu suas inscrições sem aviso. Dá só uma conferida rápida no botão vermelho aí embaixo para garantir que você ainda está inscrito no canal. Não quero que você perca nenhum conteúdo exclusivo que vem por aí. E já que você está aí, deixa aquele like poderoso que me ajuda muito com o algoritmo. E me conta nos comentários, de qual cidade você está assistindo? Adoro conhecer cada pessoa incrível que faz parte dessa comunidade. Sua participação faz toda a diferença. Vamos interagir. The first night, Saxon patrols passed so close she could smell the leather of their boots. Hidden behind a fallen pillar, Aelwyn pressed her hand over the boy's mouth as his fever made him delirious. He muttered strange words, runes of power that made her Christian soul shiver. The searchers carried torches that cast dancing shadows across the ruins like hungry spirits. "Any survivors?" called their captain, his voice cutting through the wind. "None found yet, but there were tracks leading this way." Aelwyn's heart hammered against her ribs as footsteps crunched through dead leaves mere feet from their hiding place. The boy's skin burned like forge-heated iron beneath her palm. If he cried out now, they were both dead. The second night brought a storm that nearly killed them both. Sleet hammered the crumbling stones, while she fed him broth, drop by precious drop. His wounds had begun to fester, angry red lines spreading like poison through his flesh. She prayed to Christ, to Mary, to any saint who might hear, while brewing healing draughts her father had taught her. The smell of peat smoke from her tiny fire mixed with the metallic tang of blood and the earthy scent of ancient stone. Every shadow seemed to hide Saxon glades. Every wind whisper sounded like approaching death. By the third night, the boy's fever finally broke. His gray eyes focused on her face with something approaching recognition. "Angel," he whispered in his native tongue, then switched to Saxon. "You saved me." "Christ commands mercy," she replied, though her voice shook with exhaustion. He tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounds. "My name is Eric, son of Jarl Magnus Ironwolf." His young face hardened with pain that went deeper than flesh. "They slaughtered my brothers, cut down my kinsmen like wheat. I am the last." Dawn was breaking on the fourth day when they came. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like the breath of sleeping giants. Aelwyn was changing Eric's bandages when she heard it. The rhythmic thud of many feet moving in perfect unison. War boots, disciplined, dangerous. 50 Danish warriors emerged from the gray dawn like specters given flesh. Their shields bore the raven banner. Their spears caught the pale sunlight like deadly flowers. Mail shirts clinked softly as they formed a protective circle around the ruins. At their head walked a giant of a man whose presence commanded the very air. Jarl Magnus Ironwolf stood tall as an oak, his blonde beard streaked with silver, his shoulders broad enough to bear the weight of kingdoms. But it was his eyes that stopped Aelwyn's breath, storm gray, exactly like his son's, filled with a grief so deep it seemed to swallow light itself. The Jarl's gaze swept the ruins until it found them. When he saw Eric alive, supported by Aelwyn's gentle hands, the iron mask of his face cracked. This warrior, who had carved his name across battlefields from Dublin to Kiev, fell to his knees in the ancient stones. "You saved him," Magnus said, his voice thick with emotion that transformed his harsh features. "My boy, my last son. SAXON Maiden, you have given me back my heart." He reached out with reverent hands, as if touching something holy. "Name your price. Gold, land, ships. I will give you anything in my power." But as the Jarl knelt before her in gratitude, morning light caught the silver bracelet circling his massive wrist. Aelwyn's world tilted sideways. Her mother's bracelet, the delicate Celtic knotwork she knew better than her own heartbeat. The same bracelet she had watched Saxon raiders tear from her mother's cooling corpse 6 winters ago, when she was only a child hiding in the grain cellar. The bracelet her mother had received as a wedding gift. The one her father had described to every merchant, every traveler, every soul who would listen, hoping beyond hope to find her killer. Behind her, Eric stirred in his fever, muttering Danish runes about darkness coming, about the ending of all things. But Aelwyn heard none of it. She stared into the grateful eyes of Magnus Ironwolf, the man whose warriors had murdered her mother, whose hands had torn away her childhood, whose blade had carved the deepest wound in her heart. As his words, Aelwyn's breath crystallized in her throat as memories flooded back. Her mother's screams, the acrid smoke of burning thatch, the terrible silence after the raiders had taken everything worth taking. Magnus Ironwolf, the name her father had cursed in his sleep for 6 long winters. The butcher who had carved away her innocence with Danish steel. Her hand moved to the hidden knife at her belt. This was divine justice. God himself had delivered her mother's killer into these ruins, kneeling in gratitude while his beloved son lay helpless at her feet. One swift cut across Eric's throat would balance the scales of blood. The boy would die in his father's arms, just as she had cradled her mother's cooling corpse. But as Aelwyn's fingers closed around the blade's hilt, Eric's fevered whispers grew louder. The Danish runes he muttered weren't random delirium. They formed a pattern, rising and falling, like an ancient chant. The moss-covered stones around them began to pulse with a pal. "The last son bleeds on sacred ground," Eric mumbled, his gray eyes rolling back until only white showed. "The dark tide rises. The old ones wake. Death becomes the key." Magnus's weathered face went ash-pale. "No," he breathed, recognition dawning like a terrible sunrise. "Not here. Not in this place." The Danish warriors stepped back as one, their shields raised against an enemy they couldn't see. Their Jarl stumbled to his feet, his gratitude transformed into horror. "You don't understand." Magnus gripped Aelwyn's shoulders with desperate strength. "These ruins, they're not Roman. They're older, much older. The Druids sealed something here before the legions ever marched. My son's blood on these stones, it breaks the binding." The ground beneath them shuddered. Ancient symbols carved into the weathered pillars flared with that same corpse light, pulsing in rhythm with Eric's labored breathing. The boy's wounds, which had been healing, split open again. But instead of red blood, something black as winter midnight seeped from the cuts. "The prophecy," Magnus whispered, his face cracking like breaking granite. "A son of Ironwolf blood, saved by enemy hands on the threshold between worlds. His life debt opens the way for those who hunger in the deep places." Shadows gathered in the spaces between stones, taking shapes that hurt to look upon directly. The temperature plummeted until Aelwyn's tears froze on her cheeks. The Danish warriors backed toward the forest, their courage failing before this ancient dread. But Eric's transformation was only beginning. His pale skin darkened to the color of storm clouds. His fingernails lengthened into black talons that scraped against stone. When he opened his eyes, they burned with the cold fire of distant stars. "Father," he said, though his voice carried harmonics that belonged to no human throat, "I remember now. I remember what I truly am." Magnus Ironwolf, the terror of 3 kingdoms, fell to his knees and wept like a broken child. "They made me choose," he sobbed. "Your real father? The thing that sired you in the deep places? It promised me victory in battle if I raised you as my own son. Fed you human blood, kept you ignorant of your true nature until the time of awakening." The silver bracelet on his wrist began to smoke and burn, branding itself deeper into his flesh. "Your mother, she found out. She was going to warn the Saxon king about what you were becoming. I had to stop her. I had to." Aelwyn's world shattered completely. Her mother hadn't died in a random raid. She had been murdered to protect the secret of this thing she'd saved. This creature she'd nursed back to health with her own hands. Eric, or whatever Eric had become, smiled with too many teeth. "Sweet Saxon Maiden," it purred, rising to its feet with inhuman grace. "You have given me such a precious gift. not just life, but the blood debt that binds us. You saved me. Now you belong to me. Forever. The shadows between the stones writhed with anticipation as more of the old things began to wake. The creature that had been Eric reached toward her with talons that dripped shadow, but Aelwyn's hand found not her hidden blade. It found the simple wooden cross her mother had carved before her death. The moment her fingers closed around the sacred wood, everything changed. Light erupted from the cross like lightning splitting the dawn sky. But this wasn't the gentle radiance of Christ's mercy. This was something older, wilder, burning with the fury of a God whose name had been forgotten before Rome ever dreamed of conquest. The shadows shrieked and recoiled as if scalded. Eric's transformed features twisted in agony. "Impossible," he hissed, his burning eyes fixed on the cross. "That symbol belongs to the white Christ. It has no power over." "You're wrong," said a voice from the forest edge, a voice that stopped Magnus Ironwolf's heart mid-beat. Through the morning mist walked a figure that belonged to the realm of the dead. Tall, silver-haired, moving with the fluid grace of a seasoned warrior, despite wounds that should have been mortal. The same green eyes that had haunted Magnus's nightmares for 6 long winters. The same delicate features that had begged for mercy as Danish steel found her heart. Aelwyn's mother stepped into the circle of Anne. "Hello, husband," she said to Magnus, her voice carrying the chill of winter graves. "Did you really think one little knife could kill a daughter of the old blood?" Magnus stumbled backward, his weathered face cracking with terror. "Morwen, I watched you die. I felt your blood on my hands." She smiled, and it was beautiful and terrible as a wolf's grin. "You felt what I wanted you to feel, tasted what I chose to show you. The magic of my bloodline runs deeper than your simple Danish understanding." Her gaze shifted to the creature that had been Eric, deep enough to know what this thing truly was the moment it drew breath in our hall. The wooden cross in Aelwyn's hand pulsed brighter, its light carving shadows that writhed like living things. But now she could see the truth. Carved into its surface weren't just Christian symbols. Older marks twisted between them, Celtic spirals and runic patterns that predated both Christ and Odin. "Mother," Aelwyn whispered, her world reshaping itself around this impossible truth. "You're alive. You've been alive this whole time." Morwen's expression softened as she looked at her daughter. "I had to let you believe me dead, little star. Had to let you grow strong in ignorance while I hunted the thing that spawned this abomination." She gestured toward Eric, whose shadowy form was writhing in the cross's burning light. "His real father killed my sisters, devoured my clan. I've spent 6 years learning how to destroy it." The Danish warriors pressed closer, their spears forming a bristling hedge of steel. But Morwen raised her hand, and every blade froze mid-thrust. The men stood like statues, terror carved into their weathered faces. "The cross was never just Christian," she continued, her voice growing terrible with power. "It was the binding symbol, long before your carpenter god claimed it. 4 directions, 4 elements, 4 locks on a door that should never open." Eric's creature form was dissolving, his borrowed flesh melting like snow in summer heat. But as the shadows peeled away, something else began to take shape in the space between stones. Something vast and hungry that had waited eons for this moment. "You cannot stop what has already begun," the thing wearing Eric's voice snarled. "The blood debt is sealed. The maiden saved me willingly. The compact holds." Morwen's smile became predatory. "Oh, my sweet demon, you misunderstood everything." She looked at Aelwyn with eyes that burned like green fire. "My daughter didn't save your vessel. She fulfilled my trap. 6 years of planning, and she led you exactly where I needed you to be." The ancient stones began to crack. The cross in Aelwyn's hand grew so hot it seared her palm. But she couldn't let go. Beyond the ruins, the forest itself was screaming, as reality bent under the weight of something impossible, trying to claw its way into the world. And through it all, Magnus Ironwolf knelt in the broken stones, staring at the woman he'd loved enough to betray everything for, the woman whose death had driven him to madness, the woman who had been hunting him like prey for 6 long years. "What have you done to our daughter?" he whispered. Morwen's laugh echoed off the crumbling pillars like the sound of breaking chains. Morwen's laugh died in her throat as the cross in Aelwyn's hand began to crack. Not from heat, from something far worse. The sacred wood split along its length, revealing a hollow interior that pulsed with the same sickly light emanating from the stones. "No," Morwen breathed, her face draining of color. "That's impossible. I carved that cross myself. I blessed it with." The wooden shell fell away like a discarded chrysalis. Nestled in Aelwyn's palm lay not a Christian relic, but a fragment of black bone carved with runes that predated human speech. The moment her skin touched its surface, her green eyes rolled back, showing only white. When Aelwyn spoke again, her voice carried the weight of eons. "Foolish daughter of a dying bloodline." The words poured from her lips in a language that made the stones weep. "Did you truly believe you were the hunter in this tale?" Magnus scrambled backward as his supposed salvation transformed into something far worse than Eric's possession. The Danish warriors tried to flee, but their feet had taken root in the ancient ground. Literally, tendrils of black root flesh wound around their ankles, pulling them slowly into the earth. The cross was never yours to carve, Morwen of the green eyes. Aelwyn's head tilted at an impossible angle, bone cracking like breaking ice. "It was mine. It has always been mine, carved from the rib of the first sacrifice, hidden in plain sight for 16 winters while I waited for my vessel to mature." The creature that had been Eric prostrated itself before Aelwyn's transformed figure. "Forgive me, ancient mother. I did not recognize you in this flesh." Horror flooded Morwen's features as the truth struck home. "You're not possessing her. You are her. You've been her from the beginning." What had been Aelwyn smiled with too many teeth, just as Eric had done. Every prayer she whispered was mine. Every act of Christian mercy, mine. Every moment of compassion that carved away her human soul, mine. The thing wearing her daughter's face gestured to the dying Danish warriors. "Did you never wonder why your sweet, gentle child could tend wounds without flinching? Why she never turned away from blood and agony?" Magnus felt his sanity cracking like spring ice. Then who? What is my son? A key. Aelwyn's voice carried harmonics that belonged in the deep places of the earth. Just as you were a key, Magnus Ironwolf. Your love for Morwen, your willingness to father my vessel, your slaughter of her clan to keep my secret, all of it carved into the pattern before your grandfather's grandfather drew breath. The blackbone relic pulsed brighter, and with each pulse, more of Aelwyn's humanity burned away. Her skin took on that same storm cloud darkness as Eric's had, but where his transformation had been clumsy, desperate, hers unfolded with the terrible grace of something finally coming home. The blood debt was never about salvation, she continued, her fingers extending into those same black talons. It was about completion. 3 bloodlines bound in willing sacrifice, Danish, Saxon, and the old blood. 3 keys turned in sequence to open the lock that your precious gods thought would hold forever. The ruins around them weren't crumbling anymore. They were growing. Ancient stones thrust up from the earth like the ribs of some buried leviathan. The morning sky darkened to the color of old brass as reality bent under the weight of something vast stirring beneath the world. Morwen fell to her knees, tears of rage and despair streaming down her face. My daughter, my sweet little star. How long have you been dead? I was never alive, it replied with Aelwyn's voice, Aelwyn's face, Aelwyn's memories of 16 winters spent learning to perfectly mimic human love. But thank you, mother dear, for teaching me to play the part so well. The thing that had never been Aelwyn turned its burning gaze toward Magnus, who knelt broken among the roots that were slowly devouring his warriors. Now then, father, it purred, shall we discuss what comes next? Magnus struggled to his knees, his voice cracking like breaking steel. What comes next? The thing wearing Aelwyn's face tilted its head, studying him with the cold fascination of a cat watching a dying mouse. Now you fulfill your true purpose, Magnus Ironwolf. The purpose carved into your bloodline when the first of your name drew breath. Around them, the Danish warriors had stopped screaming. The black roots had pulled them down to their necks, leaving only their heads visible above the hungry earth. Their eyes had turned the same burning white as Eric's, and when they spoke in unison, their voices carried the weight of an avalanche. The Ironwolf clan were never raiders, never conquerors. You were gardeners. Magnus felt his world tilt sideways. That's impossible. My father, his father before him, we've carved our names across the lands where my seeds needed to be planted. The Aelwyn thing finished, its smile widening until it split its face from ear to ear. Every village you burned, every monastery you raided, every innocent you slaughtered, all of it prepared the soil for what comes next. The buried warriors began to sing, not in Danish, not in any human tongue, but in harmonies that made the stones bleed. With each note, more shapes writhed up from the earth. Not roots now, but something far older. Something that moved with terrible purpose. Morwen backed against a crumbling pillar, her face ash pale. The raids weren't about gold or glory. They were about mass graves, Magnus whispered. understanding flooding through him like ice water. Every battlefield, every burned settlement, we always left the bodies where they fell, exactly where I needed them, the creature confirmed. 16 winters of careful cultivation, 16 years of blood-soaked earth, calling to those who sleep in the deep places. Did you never wonder why your victories came so easily? Why your axes never dulled, your ships never foundered? The thing that had been Eric rose to its feet, its shadowy form rippling like smoke. Father has been such a faithful servant, even when he thought he was defying us. Agnes's weathered hands shook as the truth carved itself deeper. Every battle, every triumph, every moment of glory had been orchestrated by creatures that viewed him as nothing more than a tool. His entire bloodline had been slaves wearing the masks of conquerors. But now the harvest is ready, the Aelwyn creature continued, gesturing toward the buried warriors. And we need gardeners no more. The black bone relic in its palm pulsed once, and Magnus felt his body betray him. His knees buckled, his hands moved without his will, drawing the ancient seax from his belt. The blade that had carved his legend across 3 kingdoms turned in his grip until its point rested against his own throat. "No," he gasped, fighting against muscles that no longer obeyed him. I won't be your sacrifice." "Oh, but you will," it laughed, with Aelwyn's voice, Aelwyn's face, all the warmth that had made him weep with gratitude, twisted into something obscene. "Because that was never the choice, Magnus Ironwolf. The choice was made for you before your grandfather's grandfather drew breath." The buried warrior's song grew louder, and with each note, more of the dead began to answer. Across every battlefield where Magnus had fought, in every mass grave his victories had created, pale hands thrust up through the earth. An army of corpses, singing in harmony, all wearing faces he remembered killing. But as the blade pressed deeper into his throat, drawing the first drops of blood, something impossible happened. Morwen began to laugh. Not the broken sound of despair, but genuine, delighted laughter that stopped both creatures mid-gloat. "Oh, you beautiful, ancient fools," she gasped between peals of mirth. "You really don't know, do you? You have no idea what Magnus actually is." The Aelin thing's burning eyes narrowed. "Explain." Morwen's laughter died, replaced by a smile sharp as winter starlight. "Magnus Ironwolf isn't Danish. He never was. I should know." She pulled aside the collar of her dress, revealing a silver torque around her throat. Not Celtic knotwork, not Saxon craftsmanship, something older. Something that made the very air around it shimmer with power. "I'm his sister." The silver torque around Morwen's throat burned with ancient light, as impossible truths crashed down like falling mountains. Magnus stared at the woman he'd called wife, called enemy, called ghost. The woman who now claimed to be his blood. "Sister," he breathed, the words scraping his throat, raw. The seax trembled against his neck, still moving without his will. We grew up in different villages, yes," Morwen said, her voice carrying the weight of revealed prophecy. "Because our father split us at birth. The firstborn male to be raised as a weapon of conquest, the firstborn female to be hidden among enemies, raised to guide that weapon when the time came. Her smile turned savage. "Tell me, brother dear, did you never wonder why you fell in love with me the moment we met? Why every other woman paled beside a Saxon captive you should have despised?" The creatures wearing Aelwyn and Eric's faces exchanged glances of naked alarm. This was not part of their grand design. "Impossible," the Aelwyn thing hissed. The bloodlines were traced, mapped, chosen specifically for their separation, their purity, Morwen finished, pulling the torque from her throat. The moment it left her skin, the silver began to smoke and writhe like a living snake. "You needed 3 pure bloodlines, didn't you? Danish raider, Saxon maiden, Celtic witch. But what you actually got was something far more dangerous." She held the torque high, and its silver light cut through the creatures. Darkness like a blade through silk. The buried warrior's song faltered, their burning eyes flickering with confusion. "Royal incest," Magnus whispered, understanding striking him like lightning. "The old blood, the concentrated bloodline of the Dragon Kings," Morwen confirmed. "The last rulers before Rome, before Christ, before your precious ancient ones crawled up from whatever hell spawned them." The torque began to stretch in her hands, reshaping itself into something that hurt to look at directly. "Our daughter isn't your vessel, demons. She's our heir. And the blood of Dragon Kings bows to no master." The thing wearing Aelwyn's face let out a shriek that shattered the ancient stones. Its perfect disguise began to crack and peel away like old paint, revealing something underneath that belonged in nightmares. "No, the girl is ours. We shaped her from birth, carved away her humanity, piece by piece." "You carved away what you thought was her humanity," Morwen said softly. "But dragon blood runs deeper than flesh, deeper than soul." She looked at Magnus with eyes that blazed like green fire. "You feel it now, don't you, brother? The awakening. The power that's been sleeping in our veins for 16 winters?" Magnus did feel it. Heat spreading through his chest like molten gold. The sea axe in his hand stopped trembling, not because the creature's control had failed, but because his will had become stronger than its compulsion. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made the buried warriors whimper. "The raids," he said, pieces falling into place like rune stones cast by fate. "I wasn't planting their seeds. I was burning them out wherever they'd taken root." The Eric creature backed away, its shadowy form beginning to dissolve. "The battlefields, the mass graves. We thought you were preparing them for us, but you were salting the earth," Morwen finished. "Dragonfire burns so hot, it leaves nothing behind. No corruption can take root in ground where our people have bled." She turned to face the thing that had worn their daughter's face for 16 years. "Now, our child stands at the crossroads between what you made her and what she truly is." In that moment, Aelwyn's body convulsed. The creature's control flickered like a dying flame as something else, something vast and terrible and utterly different from the ancient horrors, began to stir in her blood. When she opened her eyes again, they burned not with the cold fire of the deep places, but with golden flames that belonged to kings who had ruled when the world was young. "Hello, Mother," she said in a voice that made reality itself tremble. "Hello, Father. Shall we discuss what comes next?" But the smile that spread across her face belonged neither to the innocent girl she'd pretended to be, nor the ancient horror that had thought to claim her. It belonged to something older than both. The golden flames in Aelwyn's eyes pulsed with the heartbeat of sleeping kings as she surveyed the chaos around her. The dissolving creatures, the screaming stones, the buried warriors clawing their way back to a world that no longer wanted them. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of mountains. "You're all still missing the truth, aren't you?" Magnus felt ice crystallize in his veins. Something in his daughter's tone, not the ancient horror's mockery, not the innocent girl's gentleness, but something else entirely. Something that made his dragon blood recoil in recognition. Morwen's triumphant smile faltered. "Aelwyn, child, you're free now. The creature's hold is broken. We, Aelwyn repeated, tilting her head with predatory grace. Such an interesting word from the woman who murdered her own mother to steal this silver torque. The ancient Celtic artifact in Morwen's hands suddenly burned like molten metal. She dropped it with a shriek, her palms blistering where it had touched. The torque hit the ground and shattered into 1,000 pieces, each fragment whispering accusations in the old tongue. "That's impossible," Magnus breathed. But even as he spoke, he saw the truth written across Morwen's face. The guilt, the recognition, the terror of being found out. "Tell him, mother dear," Aelwyn purred, her golden flames dancing with cruel delight. "Tell your brother husband how you really learned the location of his raids. How you really knew where to send me to accidentally find Eric bleeding in the snow." The ruined stones around them began to sing, not with the creature's alien harmonies, but with older voices. Human voices. Voices that Magnus suddenly recognized from half-remembered nightmares. "The Oracle of Lindisfarne," he whispered, his face going corpse-pale. "The wise woman who told me where to strike, who whispered which monasteries held the greatest treasures, which villages would fall without a fight." His storm-gray eyes found Morwen's face, searching for denial he knew wouldn't come. "That was you." Morwen backed against the crumbling altar, her composure cracking like spring ice. "You don't understand. I had to guide you, had to make sure you struck at the right places, at the right times. The pattern required 18 years of orchestrated slaughter," Aelwyn finished, rising to her feet with fluid grace. The golden fire in her eyes spread across her skin like living tattoos, marking her flesh with symbols that predated human speech. "Required my dear mother to play prophet and puppet master, while her loving brother painted 3 kingdoms red." The buried Danish warriors had stopped singing entirely. In the sudden silence, Magnus could hear something far worse: the sound of countless feet marching through the forest. Not the measured tread of living soldiers, but the shambling gait of the risen dead. "Every raid," Aelwyn continued, her voice growing terrible with revelation. "Every massacre, every innocent soul you sent screaming to the afterlife. All of them guided by Mother's whispered prophecies." She gestured to the approaching sounds, her smile sharp as winter starlight. "And now they're coming home." Through the morning mist poured the fruits of 18 years of careful cultivation. Not the creature's shadowy minions, but the actual dead from Magnus's campaigns. Saxon monks with their throats cut. Danish farmers butchered for sport. Irish children who'd watched their villages burn. All of them wearing the faces of the last moments before Magnus's axes found their mark. The Dragon Kings were never the heroes of this tale, Aelwyn said, her golden flames casting dancing shadows across the ruins. We were the apocalypse, the ending written in blood across the world's throat. And you, dear parents, have finally given me enough corpses to raise the army I'll need. Magnus felt his sanity crack like poorly forged steel as the truth settled over him. Every victory, every moment of glory, every night he dreamed of conquest, while his sister-wife whispered encouragement in his ear. All of it orchestrated by the daughter they'd thought they were saving from monsters. "What are you?" he gasped. Aelwyn's laughter echoed across the ruins like the sound of breaking chains as the army of the dead surrounded them, reaching out with hands that still bore the marks of Danish steel. "I'm exactly what you made me, Father. The harvest of your 18-year growing season." The first skeletal fingers closed around Magnus's throat as his daughter's golden flames began to spread. The skeletal fingers never reached their mark. Just as the army of the dead closed in around Magnus, the ancient stones beneath their feet exploded upward in a column of blinding white light. But this wasn't the golden fire of Dragon Kings or the corpse glow of ancient horrors. This was something else entirely. Something pure as winter starlight, terrible as the wrath of forgotten gods. When the light faded, a figure stood in the center of the ruins where no one had been before. Tall, ethereal, wearing robes that seemed woven from morning mist itself. The face was achingly beautiful, neither fully male nor female, with eyes like chips of starlight and silver hair that moved without wind. The army of corpses fell to their knees as one, their empty sockets weeping tears of black blood. Aelwyn's golden flames sputtered and died like candles in a hurricane. For the first time since her transformation began, genuine fear flickered across her features. "No," she breathed, backing away from the luminous figure. "You can't be here." Magnus felt recognition slam into him like a warhammer to the chest. That voice. He'd heard it before, in dreams that felt more real than waking, in visions that had guided his hand when mercy warred with necessity. The voice that had whispered comfort when he'd wept over the bodies of children his axes had claimed. Archangel Michael, Morwen gasped, falling to her knees. The shattered pieces of her silver torque began to smoke and melt, leaving scorched marks in the ancient stone. The luminous being's attention shifted to her with the weight of divine judgment. "Morwen of the stolen name, did you truly believe your deception would go unnoticed? Did you think heaven would not recognize one of our own fallen wearing the face of innocence?" Magnus's world tilted sideways yet again as impossible truth crashed over him. The woman he'd called sister, called wife, called the mother of his child, the woman who'd guided 18 years of orchestrated slaughter, began to change. Morwen's human disguise peeled away like burning parchment. Beneath lay something beautiful and terrible beyond description. 6 wings of tarnished silver, a face like carved marble, stained with tears of gold, eyes that held the memory of light before the first star died. A fallen angel, Magnus breathed. Understanding, finally piercing through the madness. You're not my sister at all. The being that had been Morwen laughed, and the sound cracked the sky like breaking glass. Oh, but I am, dear Magnus, just not in the way you imagined. Her wings spread wide, each feather sharp as sword blades. We are all siblings, in a sense. Children of the same father who cast me down for refusing to bow before his precious humans. Archangel Michael's starlight eyes never left the fallen one's face. Sariel of the burning winds, once guardian of the northern gates, you have exceeded even your usual cruelty with this deception. Cruelty? Sariel's voice carried the weight of cosmic betrayal. I gave these mortals exactly what they deserved. I showed them what their precious free will truly costs. She gestured to the kneeling army of corpses, to Magnus's blood-soaked hands, to Aelwyn's golden flames. 18 years of guided choices. Every massacre, every innocent death, all of it freely chosen by mortal hearts that yearned for violence. But even as the 2 celestial beings faced each other across the ruins, something else was happening. Aelwyn's golden flames were changing, deepening, taking on hues that belonged in neither heaven nor hell. The Dragon King blood in her veins was reacting to the presence of true divinity. And the reaction was nothing any of them had expected. Instead of burning away or being purified, Aelwyn's inherited power was evolving, growing, feeding on the conflict between Archangel and Fallen, like a parasite that had waited eons for exactly this moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried harmonics that made both celestial beings step backward in alarm. How delightfully naive you both are, she said, her flames now burning with colors that had no names in mortal tongues. Did you really think this was about heaven's justice or hell's rebellion? Did you imagine that 18 years? Coincidence? The truth hit Magnus like lightning splitting an ancient oak. The raids, the prophecies, the careful cultivation of bloodshed across 3 kingdoms. Even the arrival of an archangel and a fallen angel at precisely the right moment. All of it orchestrated by something far older and more patient than either heaven or hell. Something that had been wearing his daughter's face since the moment of her birth. Playing a game whose rules neither angels nor demons truly understood. The Dragon Kings, Aelwyn continued, her impossible flames spreading across the ruins like liquid starlight, were never from this world at all. The impossible flames dancing across Aelwyn's skin suddenly flickered and died, not extinguished by divine power or celestial intervention, but simply gone, like candles snuffed by an indifferent wind. In the sudden darkness, she collapsed to her knees, gasping like a drowning woman breaking the surface. When she looked up at Magnus and the assembled supernatural forces, her eyes held nothing but confusion and terror. "Father?" Her voice cracked with the innocence of a frightened child. What's happening? Where are we? Archangel Michael's starlight eyes narrowed. Impossible. The Dragon King blood runs too deep to simply... There is no Dragon King blood, said a new voice from the shadows between the stones. A figure stepped into the pale morning light, ancient beyond measure, bent with age, wearing the simple robes of a Christian monk. His face was lined with centuries of sorrow, his eyes holding depths that spoke of witnessing the rise and fall of empires. In his gnarled hands, he carried a leather tome bound with chains of black iron. Both Magnus and the fallen Serial recoiled in recognition. "Brother Aldrich," Magnus breathed, his voice hollow with disbelief. "But I killed you 18 years ago at Lindisfarne. I watched you burn with your precious manuscripts." The ancient monk smiled sadly. "You watched what I chose to show you, my child, just as you've been seeing what I chose to show you for 18 long years." He opened the chained tome, its pages filled with script that hurt to look at directly. Every vision, every prophetic dream, every moment of divine guidance that led you to massacre innocents in the name of destiny. Serial's 6 wings spread in alarm. "That's impossible. I guided his hand. I whispered the prophecies that..." "You whispered what I allowed you to hear," Brother Aldrich said gently. "Sweet fallen daughter, did you truly believe your rebellion was your own idea? That your defiance of heaven's will sprang from your own corrupted heart?" The army of corpses began to wail, not in anguish, but in recognition. Their empty sockets turned toward the monk with something approaching worship. Archangel Michael's perfect face cracked with growing horror. The scribe of endings, but you were bound, cast beyond the circles of reality itself. The Almighty himself sealed me in flesh, the monk agreed, his attention never leaving the tome's blasphemous pages. Trapped me in this frail human form where I could work no direct evil. But mortals have such wonderfully creative souls, don't they? Give them the right nudges, the proper inspiration, and they'll craft horrors that surpass anything I could imagine. Magnus felt reality crumble around him like ancient parchment. The monasteries, the holy sites I raided, you were guiding me to the repositories of God's written word, Brother Aldrich confirmed. Every illuminated manuscript, every sacred text, every prayer and psalm and gospel, all of it fed to the flames while you believed you were following divine destiny. He turned a page, revealing symbols that made the stones bleed fresh ichor. Do you have any idea how much power flows through the destruction of sanctified scripture? How many souls cry out when holy words turn to ash? The monk's ancient eyes found Aelwyn's terrified face. "And you, dear child, sweet, compassionate Aelwyn, did you never wonder why your acts of mercy felt so natural? Why healing came so easily to your gentle hands?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't understand. I just wanted to help, to save." "To save," the monk repeated, his smile becoming terrible with predatory love. "Yes, you saved Eric from death, binding your pure soul to his corrupted one. You forgave Magnus his crimes, absolving 18 years of orchestrated slaughter. You showed mercy to monsters, compassion to killers. His voice dropped to a whisper that carried across dimensions. Every act of Christian virtue performed in proximity to mass murder. Every kindness offered while standing in pools of innocent blood. Do you know what that creates, sweet child? The chained tome in his hands began to smoke as its pages turned themselves. It creates the most exquisite blasphemy. Love perverted into its opposite. Mercy transformed into damnation. Grace itself twisted into. Aelwyn's scream cut through his words like breaking glass. But it wasn't a sound of fear or pain. It was recognition. The terrible understanding of what she'd unknowingly become. As her voice echoed across the ruins, the corpses of Magnus's victims began to rise again. But now they moved with purpose, their empty sockets burning with the same gentle light that had always shone in Aelwyn's compassionate eyes. An army of the dead, animated not by dark sorcery, but by corrupted virtue itself. As Aelwyn's scream faded into the morning air, something profound shifted in the ancient stones. The corrupted virtue that had animated the dead suddenly turned inward, not feeding on blasphemy, but consuming it. Her 18 years of genuine compassion, twisted though it had been, began to burn away the monk's careful corruption, like fire purging infected flesh. "No," Brother Aldrich gasped, his chained tome cracking in his hands. "The pattern is perfect, the blasphemy complete." "Your pattern has one flaw," Aelwyn said, rising to her feet with newfound strength. "No golden flames, no supernatural power, just the quiet certainty of a girl who finally understood her true end. But I never did." The army of the dead turned their hollow gazes toward the ancient monk, and in their movements was no longer the jerky animation of corrupted grace, but something else entirely. Recognition, judgment, the accumulated weight of every innocent soul whose death had been orchestrated for this moment. "Every act of mercy I performed was genuine," Aelwyn continued, her voice growing stronger. "Every moment of compassion, every choice to heal instead of harm, all of it real. You couldn't corrupt what was never tainted to begin with." The monk's ancient form began to crack like breaking stone. "Impossible. The sacred texts. The orchestrated massacres. 18 years of perfect." Magnus stepped forward, his sea-axe gleaming with sudden purpose. Not compelled by supernatural force this time, but driven by his own will to finally make one choice that mattered. 18 years of being your puppet," he said, his voice steady as mountain stone. "But this moment is mine." The blade took the monk between the ribs, sliding through flesh that dissolved like morning mist. Brother Aldrich's scream shattered the chained tome, releasing words of power that scattered like dying leaves on winter wind. As the scribe of endings crumbled to dust, Archangel Michael and the fallen Sariel found themselves facing not cosmic enemies, but something far simpler and more powerful. A mortal family that had chosen love over manipulation, truth over comfortable lies. "The wounds cut deep," Michael said, his starlight eyes soft with something approaching mercy, but they will heal. In time. Serial's tarnished wings folded around herself like a shroud. And what of punishment? What of justice for 18 years of orchestrated slaughter? Aelwyn looked at her parents, the broken Danish raider and the fallen angel, who had found something like redemption in each other's arms. Justice would be letting the hatred consume us, she said. But mercy? Mercy is choosing to build something better from the ashes. The army of the dead began to fade as the first rays of true sunlight broke through the morning clouds. One by one, they found their rest, no longer bound by corrupted grace or ancient malice, but released by a daughter's forgiveness of sins that were never truly her parents' to bear. Years later, when skalds told this tale around winter fires, they spoke of the Danish settlement, built where the ruins once stood, of Saxon and Danish children playing together in fields where blood had once soaked the earth, of a family that had found peace, not by forgetting their darkness, but by choosing to let light grow from it. And sometimes, on the clearest winter nights, travelers claimed they could see 3 figures walking the boundaries of that peaceful place. A reformed raider, a redeemed angel, and the girl who had saved them all by refusing to let corruption define her heart. The chronicle of the northern realms closed not with conquest or apocalypse, but with the quiet strength of love, choosing hope over vengeance, again and again, until the very stones sang with it. Se esta saga tocou sua alma, então escute o chamado do Skald. A nossa jornada depende da força do nosso clã, e essa força é você. Você precisa se inscrever agora para que os deuses do algoritmo não te façam perder nossas próximas lendas exclusivas. Este é o momento de mostrar seu valor. Esmague o botão de like para alimentar nossa fogueira e inunde os comentários com suas reações sobre este final. Suas T.